Winter descended on Rome in 39 AD, but the cold that gripped the city had nothing to do with snow. Every household understood what this particular night meant. Someone's daughter would vanish before dawn. Picture yourself at 14, dressed for sleep, gazing through your window at a street that appears peaceful. When the sound cuts through the silence, armored boots, echoing closer, closer still. You were raised believing a summons from the Emperor carried honor. Nobody mentioned it could arrive without ceremony. Nobody mentioned guards would enter your home as though they already owned it. And nobody, absolutely nobody, explained the meaning behind that lantern wrapped in red fabric, the one they would set before your threshold. Within moments, your mother's voice will reach you, barely a whisper, as if speaking your name too loudly might summon divine wrath. Within moments, your father will attempt a smile that crumbles before it forms. Within moments, you will discover the terror every noble bloodline conceals. The Palatine does not invite daughters, it devours them. If you believe Flavia's torment begins at her doorstep, you are mistaken. What waits inside those palace walls transforms this moment into mercy. This is not folklore. This was the night they opened the Garden of Venus, a ceremony so unspeakable that Rome erased every fragment of its existence. If the buried darkness of history calls to you, subscribe to Grimoryx, press that like button, and when you reach the moment that chills you deepest, tell me where you are watching from. Let us descend together. The girl who will confront this truth first, her name is Flavia. Remember her, because everything unfolding now was forged by the man who will soon determine her fate. To comprehend how a human soul can decay from within and emerge as something capable of devouring an entire civilization, you must trace back to the origin, back to the bloodline that birthed him, back to the shadows that twisted him long before Rome learned to tremble at the sound of his name. Caligula was not conjured from madness. He was born into brilliance, son of Germanicus, Rome's golden general, the man whose mere presence could silence a legion and ignite a city's devotion. The child should have inherited dignity, valor, nobility. Instead, something far more corrosive seeped into his marrow. His childhood did not unfold in sunlit gardens or scholarly chambers. It unfolded on the empire's ragged frontier, in military encampments soaked in sweat, iron, and the metallic whisper of war. He learned to walk among rows of battle-hardened legionaries, the earth trembling beneath hobnailed sandals. The soldiers adored their commander's son in miniature armor, calling him Caligula, Little Boot. A term of affection then, but one destined to cling to a far more sinister legacy. Even in those early years, something inside him warped. That frontier existence taught him his first lesson: power is not bestowed, it is seized. And once seized, you need not apologize for how you wield it. The first fracture in the child's soul, and the fractures were only beginning. The shattering blow arrived with Germanicus' mysterious death. Overnight, the beloved child became prey. He watched, powerless, as his mother and brothers were exiled, imprisoned, executed one by one. No foreign army, no barbarian horde, just the calculated will of Emperor Tiberius. Then came Capri, the island where Rome imagined Tiberius retired in tranquility, but where something monstrous festered behind palace doors. The twisted education Caligula received here, Flavia will pay for it in ways she cannot yet fathom. Caligula, barely more than a boy, was forced to exist beside the man who had annihilated his family. Capri was not sanctuary, it was a gilded tomb sealed with paranoia. For 6 suffocating years, he survived beneath the gaze of an emperor who trusted no one and killed without hesitation. There, Caligula absorbed a new lesson, one far darker than the first. To survive, you must smile at the man you wish to destroy. He concealed every tear, swallowed every tremor of fury, and bowed before his family's murderer. While he remained outwardly compliant, the fractures in his mind deepened, widening until something cold and venomous slipped through. When Tiberius finally died in 37 AD and the Senate elevated Caligula, now 24, to the throne, Rome exploded in euphoric relief. A new dawn, a new prince. Germanicus' son had come to cleanse the rot. For a brief moment he did. He freed prisoners, burned Tiberius spy records, slashed despised taxes, flooded the streets with gold, games, spectacles. Rome believed salvation had arrived. But the man who will one day reach for Flavia has not fully awakened yet. His darkness is only unfurling its wings. Salvation was merely the mask. Near the end of that first year, an illness struck so violently the emperor hovered between existence and oblivion. When he rose from that sickbed, something essential had not returned with him. The boy who learned to hide his hatred on Capri no longer needed to hide anything at all. Standing atop the Palatine Hill, staring down at a city that worshipped him, Caligula finally grasped a terrible truth. At the summit of absolute power, there are no gods above you, only victims below. The masses' adoration, the Senate's trembling silence, these did not humble him. His sanity peeled away like dead flesh, and beneath it emerged the creature Capri had carved. Generosity twisted into mania, justice curdled into cruelty. Within the darkness of his thoughts, an idea began to crystallize. Women of noble blood were not citizens, not daughters, not human. They were instruments. The first instrument he will test is waiting on a night Flavia does not yet know will obliterate her life. This transformation did not descend on Rome like a thunderstorm. It crept into the city like a plague, slow, silent, undetectable. A poison seeping beneath marble floors and into patrician homes until it reached those who believed themselves most secure. Somewhere across Rome, Flavia's household heard the same knock, the knock no family dared answer, yet no one was permitted to refuse. It began with a visit. The emperor's heralds carried no swords that day. They carried scrolls sealed with imperial purple, a color that meant life or extinction. Inside those scrolls lived the demand no parent dared refuse: send your daughter. Not just any daughter. The most beautiful, the most pure, the most politically advantageous. The families called it honor. They knew it was a death sentence wrapped in perfume. To refuse the emperor was treason. To obey him was to deliver your child to the beast. The girls were transported to a secluded wing of the palace, a place Caligula named with cruel irony the Garden of Venus. Flavia crossed this threshold believing she still possessed control. She would lose that illusion before sunrise. At first glance, paradise. Pink marble walls, silk-lined beds, exotic perfumes, servants moving like shadows anticipating every need. Rome's daughters entered believing they had been chosen for sacred service. Slowly, agonizingly, they realized the truth: a paradise was only decoration. The prison was everything beneath it. The real purpose of this place, the horror it concealed, was still waiting to reveal itself. This was only the beginning. Once Flavia's summons arrived, she would learn the garden did not shatter girls quickly. It shattered them slowly enough for them to comprehend every stage of their destruction. The jewels they were forced to wear were not adornments, they were chains. Heavy gold, cold against skin, branding each girl's stay-toned property. The transparent silks were worse, garments designed not to clothe but to expose, to remind them their bodies no longer belonged to themselves. Their names were the first thing Caligula erased. Real names were dangerous. Real names meant identity. He replaced them with numbers, mockeries, humiliating nicknames whispered by the emperor himself. With every stripped identity, the Garden of Venus tightened its grip. But the true weapon of the system was not jewelry, silk, or even fear, it was waiting. A torture spilling no blood, leaving no visible scars, yet hollowing them from within. They never knew when the summons would come. Tonight or weeks from now. Every moment between was execution by anticipation. The echo of Praetorian sandals in the hallway ruptured their hearts with terror. Breathing became labor. Sleep became impossible. By the time Caligula touched them, the psychological destruction was already complete. Prey softened for the slaughter. When the summons finally arrived, it led not to a private chamber but to the emperor's nightly theater, the banquets. Young women paraded before Rome's elite like exotic animals on display. Not guests, living ornaments. Caligula walked among them with the arrogance of a butcher selecting cuts of meat, commenting loudly on their bodies, mocking, praising, ranking, stripping away the last fragments of dignity they clung to. The real cruelty was not his voice. It was the silence of the men who should have protected them. Fathers, uncles, fiancés, seated at tables of honor, forced to nod at the emperor's obscenities, their smiles stretched so taut they appeared carved on. Any flicker of discomfort, any tremor of disgust could condemn them or the girl to immediate death. That silence was its own execution. Then came the final act. Not chaos, not frenzy, ritual rehearsed like theater. Soft music played to smother screams. Selected spectators watched in forced admiration. Unspoken rules governed every movement the victim had to make. This was not pleasure for Caligula. This was choreography, performance, demonstration that he owned not just bodies but souls. Flavia, standing beneath torchlight, realized the emperor no longer saw her as human. He saw her as a classroom where he practiced cruelty. Take Flavia, daughter of a respected consul. When she first crossed the Garden of Venus threshold, she believed she might serve in ceremonies, walk beside the emperor. For the first days, Caligula showered her with gifts, attentiveness, even counterfeit gentleness. It disarmed her, softened her, set the trap. When it finally snapped, when illusion shattered and truth bared its teeth, Flavia understood the single rule governing this palace. You cannot resist a man who believes himself divine. Caligula wielded cruelty with expertise, alternating brutality with feigned affection, beating a girl one night, weeping in her lap the next as he offered jewels worth kingdoms. This emotional whiplash rewired the mind. Victims no longer saw him clearly, hope and terror blended, comfort and violence fused. The one who broke them became the only one who could soothe them, a dependency engineered to make escape impossible. Caligula was not finished. He destroyed solidarity next. Flavia tried to disappear into the crowd of victims, but in the Garden of Venus, invisibility could kill you just as quickly as being noticed. He ranked the girls who pleased him most, who disappointed him, who would receive favor or punishment. He turned them against one another until they clawed for crumbs of safety, each girl seeing the others not as companions but as competition for survival. Unity died. Once unity died, the emperor owned everything. When he tired of one, he did not free her, he sold her. Clandestine auctions inside palace walls offered broken young women to senators and generals, the same men who governed Rome by day. Caligula forced them to participate, staining their hands with the same filth coating his own. Shared guilt is the strongest leash. Now the empire's elite were chained to him by their silence. The shame did not stop there. Families were ordered to be grateful. Some fathers were forced to host celebratory feasts after their daughters were defiled, toasting their child's honor while swallowing horror like poison. In the Palatine, gratitude became another word for despair. Through all this, surveillance tightened like a noose. No corner was safe. Guards, slaves, spies, eyes everywhere. Even one muffled cry in the night could be reported as rebellion. Inside the Garden of Venus, layer after layer of humanity was scraped away until nothing remained but flesh, fear, and the echo of footsteps coming closer. By 40 and 41 AD, the palace atmosphere had become toxic enough to suffocate. Girls who once arrived with bright eyes and soft voices were now skeletal phantoms drifting through corridors. Many stopped speaking entirely, some stopped responding. Their minds retreated inward, hiding in the last place Caligula could not reach. Doctors noted dissociation, souls detaching from bodies just to survive. But the truth the court tried hardest to hide was far darker. The suicides had begun. Once they began, they did not stop. Some girls broke, others shattered. Flavia, caught somewhere in the middle, too frightened to die, too broken to live. Whispers among servants spoke of 6 confirmed suicides, but everyone knew the truth. 6 was only the number the palace failed to hide. The real count was buried under marble floors and imperial silence. Flavia began to wonder if surviving was actually the cruelest outcome. Death, once the thing they feared most, became the only horizon offering relief, a final act of sovereign freedom in a world where they owned nothing else, not even their own names. Some slit veins with shards of shattered vases. Some tore strips of silk from luxurious dresses and fashion nooses. Others simply climbed balconies and stepped off, letting gravity deliver the mercy their emperor never would. For these girls, death's cold arms were kinder than Caligula's touch. The emperor was not satisfied. In his delusion of godhood, he devised new cruelty, torment so perverse it attacked victims through the people they loved. He allowed parents to visit their daughters, not to rescue them, not to comfort them, but to watch them suffer. The girls were painted, perfumed, dressed in silks to hide bruises. They were forced to smile, forced to perform, forced to lie, their horror concealed behind cosmetics and trembling lips. The parents, under Centurion's unblinking eyes, had to pretend this was celebration. If a mother's voice cracked, she was executed. If a daughter dared let the mask slip, her family paid the price. Everyone trapped in grotesque theater, swallowing agony while the architect of their suffering watched with satisfaction. Then Caligula made the single mistake every tyrant eventually makes. He humiliated the men who carried the swords. Destroying women was not enough. He needed to emasculate the pillars of Rome itself. He dragged senators to watch their wives violated. He mocked commanders of the Praetorian Guard, stripping them of dignity before their own men. He forced honored soldiers to utter vulgar passwords designed to degrade them. Among those soldiers was a man whose loyalty had once been unbreakable, Cassius Chaerea, hardened veteran, faithful servant of Germanicus. Caligula's mockery of him was relentless. The emperor thought himself untouchable, believed no blade would ever dare rise against him. He was wrong. The hatred in Chaerea and the conspirators mutated into something no longer political. It became survival. Caligula, once a useful tool, had become a malignant tumor eating through the Roman state. On January 24, 41 AD, the tension finally exploded. During the Palatine Games, Caligula left through a private underground corridor, the Cryptoporticus, to take a bath. He entered the dim stone passageway believing himself immortal. He would not leave it alive. Chaerea and the conspirators blocked his path. No speech, no trial, no warning, only steel. The first strike, a blade to the neck, shattered his larynx, silencing the man who demanded worship as a god. His cries choked in a flood of his own blood. Then came the frenzy, more than 30 stab wounds tore into him. The self-proclaimed Jupiter of Rome fell to the ground, writhing, pleading, dying like the terrified mortal he truly was. His life ended in a puddle of blood, humiliation etched across his contorted face. The nightmare was not over. Just meters away, sealed inside the Garden of Venus, the young women heard the chaos, screams, metal clashing, thunder of rushing feet. They huddled in corners, shaking, unable to understand whether this was salvation or another form of doom. Then silence. Not the heavy silence of oppression, but the empty, unfamiliar silence of a world where the monster was suddenly gone. None of them dared move. After years in that palace, they understood one thing with horrifying clarity: when something ends in Rome, something worse often begins. They were right to fear. Caligula's death did not birth a golden dawn, it opened a void. His Germanic bodyguards, discovering their emperor dead, erupted in blind fury. The palace transformed into a slaughterhouse within minutes, cutting down servants, officials, anyone unlucky enough to cross their path. For the young women, the Garden of Venus became a death trap. Some fled barefoot through corridors littered with broken glass and bodies. Others, paralyzed by years of conditioning, barricaded themselves in chambers, gripping each other in darkness, waiting to see whether the next hand on the door would kill them or free them. Hours later, when the blood haze cleared, an unlikely figure emerged from hiding: Claudius, Caligula's trembling uncle, dragged from behind a curtain and thrust onto the imperial throne. Claudius, ever the survivor, faced an impossible truth. If Rome learned what happened inside the Garden of Venus, the system, the complicity, the noble family's participation, the empire itself might crack. He made a decision darker than silence and far more convenient. For the survivors of the Garden of Venus, Rome's solution was not justice, it was payment. A cold transaction meant to suffocate the truth before it could draw a single breath. The palace returned young women to their families draped in gold, clothed in expensive fabrics, carrying dowries large enough to silence an entire city. Every coin carried the same unspoken command: forget. Forget what happened, forget who did it, forget the daughters Rome fed to a god who was not a god at all. No trials were held. No accomplices punished. Rome simply folded the truth into shadows and buried it under layers of official silence. The girls returned to their villas, but the people who came home were not the ones who left. They were shells, walking corpses, bodies that still breathed, but souls that died on the Palatine Hill and were never permitted to return. In cruel Roman society, a noblewoman's worth lived and died with her chastity. Though these girls were victims, children crushed beneath the system they could not resist, the stain followed them like a curse. Family honor ranked above truth, above compassion, above their lives. Most never married, most never lived. They were hidden in side rooms, distant wings of estates, kept away like shameful relics, seen only by servants who left food at their doors. Their trauma unfolded in agonizing, predictable patterns. A hand on their shoulder triggered panic. A sudden noise made them collapse in fear. Sleep brought nightmares so vivid they woke screaming night after night. Physical captivity had ended, but the prison in their minds had no guards to kill, no emperor to overthrow, no key that could unlock them. For them, freedom was not victory, it was a sentence, a lifelong exile inside their own bodies. Rome looked away. Rome always looked away. Easier to blame the women than confront its own corruption, easier to bury a crime than confront a civilization's rotting foundation. The truth of Caligula's reign was never about one man. It was about the system that built him, fed him, protected him, and allowed the Garden of Venus to exist in the first place. Later, historians would argue exact details, whether Suetonius embellished, whether rival dynasties magnified his cruelty. But the convergence of sources tells us one thing without question: a machine of abuse existed, a machine built to satisfy one man's darkest impulses. Rome allowed it to operate in silence. This was not an isolated horror, it was a flaw in the empire's very architecture. Rome concentrated its legislative, judicial, military, even divine power into the hands of a single man. No checks, no limits, no escape if the wrong man climbed the throne. Caligula proved how thin the line truly is between civilization and savagery, between order and chaos, between ruler and monster. That line was drawn not on marble, but on the bodies of nameless girls who perished in the Garden of Venus. Rome built wonders that survived millennia, arenas, aqueducts, law codes. But it failed at the simplest duty of any society: to protect its most vulnerable from the predators at the top. The story of these women is not just historical tragedy, it is a warning echoing across time. A nation may reach the summit of power, but if it sacrifices human dignity in the process, its legacy will be written not in glory but in shame. History is often shaped by victors, but shadows have a way of surviving. The erased names, the unsent letters, the tears dried into silk pillows, they remain in the margins Rome tried to burn away. Now they belong to us. We, centuries later, must decide whether to look at those shadows or repeat them. Evil does not always announce itself with swords and fire. Sometimes evil wears a crown. Sometimes evil hides behind silence. Sometimes evil thrives simply because too many people choose not to be outraged. If this story unsettled you, let it. If it angered you, let it. If it made you think about the cost of unchecked power, then the voices Rome tried to erase have finally been heard. Let them never be buried again.